As with Aboriginal settlement, the rivers shaped the earliest explorations and occupation patterns of the Europeans. The Parramatta River from Port Jackson first carried them inland to Rose Hill, just as the Hawkesbury River from Broken Bay would lead them a long way around to Green Hills, later named Windsor. The rivers were the vital transport and communication links between Sydney and the first inland settlements, islands within a huge forest, connected only by water. The British government expected self-sufficiency for the new colony within 2 years, but where to farm? For Port Jackson's soils were too sandy for wheat and maize, while exploration north to Broken Bay had already revealed a countryside so rocky and bare as to preclude all possibility of turning it to account. By June 1788, better soils had been found in the shale country at the head of the harbour, and Phillip established a public farm there in 1789. When experimental plantings of wheat, maize and barley flourished, he founded the first township, Rose Hill, soon renamed Parramatta. In her epic work The Colony, Grace Karskens points out that whereas the setting up of a beachhead port at Sydney Cove was one thing, putting the plan for subsistence farming into action at Parramatta was quite another. Large tracts of land had to be taken, cleared, sown and defended. Race relations here stood in stark contrast to those at Sydney Cove. Here there was no pretence to come in peace, no gifts laid upon the sand, no drawn-out dance of negotiation and diplomacy, no kidnapping of men as envoys, no consultation, talk of sharing or treaty, and no compensation. The establishment of the public farm at the head of the river in November 1788 was undisguised invasion, complete with well-organised military defences. Phillip first had an earthen-walled redoubt built above the flats, where the river curved in a crescent below Rose Hill, and posted a detachment of soldiers to guard the new farm and its workers. The local Parramattable were immediately faced with the redcoats and muskets they must already have heard about from the people downriver. As the settlement grew with the success of the grain crops, it was no longer possible for the Parramatta people to camp on the crescent, and no longer possible to catch eels, fish, tortoises and platypus about the tidal limits. In July of 1789, convict James Roos claimed his sentence to be expired. The colony held no record to the contrary, for incredibly, no one had thought to send the records of sentences out. Inspired to take up farming, an occupation to which he had been bred, Phillip permitted him to occupy an allotment near Parramatta, withholding title until his capacity as a farmer and his right to freedom had been proved. Roos laboured on ground recently cleared by other convicts out of the forest of huge grey box and red gum. He methodically broke up clods and worked the ashes of the felled giants into the soil. In the cooler months, he broadcast bearded wheat and ears of maize into the churned earth to see which grew best. Later, Phillip named this ground Experiment Farm, the experiment being how long it would take European man to feed himself by farming. Moreover, could convicts become farmers? Could men be redeemed by hard, simple, honest toil? The figure of Roos, stooped over his hoe, stood at the very centre of the Botany Bay project. Phillip and the officers watched the experiment intently. They visited him and were gladdened by his progress. Roos married convict Elizabeth Parry in 1790. By the middle of the following year, he claimed to have produced enough maize and wheat to take himself off the public stores, and his wife in a few months more. The experiment had taken 2 years. Roos and Parry had performed exactly as the British government had hoped. Parry was granted a pardon for becoming an industrious wife and mother, and Roos was granted the 30 acres he had worked so diligently. Soon, other convicts who had served their time and were willing to take up farming were placed on 30-acre lots nearby. Burrong was from Parramatta. Her family had witnessed the invasion firsthand, then suffered the ravages of the smallpox epidemic. Along with Nan Baree, she was treated for smallpox by the surgeons and their lives were saved. That was in May 1789. In recovery, she lived with white people in Sydney. In October 1790, Burrong's father, Morgaron, came to Sydney to protest the loss of his people's lands to the governor. the first recorded formal protest in Australia. Philip acknowledged their dispossession quite frankly. Certain it is that wherever our colonists fix themselves, the natives are obliged to leave that part of the country, he said. But instead of attempting compromise or amelioration of the wrongs done, Philip simply reinforced the detachment at Parramatta. The policy of amity and kindness did not include sharing land with Aboriginal people or protecting their food sources. Morgaron's children, Burong, Buludari, Garui and Warrawir Mongolmi, all went to live in Sydney with the white people. Morgaron and his wife Tadura were forced from Parramatta. They moved east to Kissing Point, earlier the country of the Wallamedigal, now deserted because of smallpox. That's where Bennelong later went to live with Burong, and where they are both buried. Buludari, Burong's brother and Morgaron's son, enjoyed friendly relations with the Europeans, including Philip himself. But in July 1791, Buludari's canoe was deliberately destroyed by convicts, and he speared a man in retaliation. Philip regretfully outlawed him. Soon after that, Buludari contracted smallpox and died. The painting of Burong shows her decorated for her brother's funeral.